Previously, in the world of Hornblower. We followed the remarkable journey of Horatio Hornblower from the very first moment he stepped aboard the HMS Indefatigable. He was a nervous, seasick midshipman, and over the course of the first 4 episodes, he grew in both skill and confidence, learning the brutal realities of naval life during the wars with revolutionary France. We saw his earliest struggles for respect and the forging of his friendship with Archie Kennedy. The examination of lieutenant tested his nerve, wits and leadership under impossible odds. The Duchess and the Devil placed him in captivity and forced him to navigate the treacherous worlds of diplomacy and honour, while in The Frogs and the Lobsters we saw him leading a doomed royalist expedition ashore, learning hard lessons about politics, loyalty and love. By the time we reach Mutiny and Retribution, Hornblower is no longer a wide-eyed youth, but a battle-hardened, if still deeply principled officer, ready to face his most dangerous challenge yet. Now, we are looking at the 5th and 6th instalment of the Hornblower series, Mutiny and Retribution. Both are adapted from the 1952 book from C.S. Forester's Lieutenant Hornblower, and I'm reviewing them together because, honestly, they are just one long episode and a single story split into 2. So, let's see what challenges our hero Hornblower has to face. Mutiny opens in Kingston, Jamaica in the year 1802. Lieutenant Hornblower finds himself imprisoned on a charge of mutiny, facing the very real prospect of hanging. His former captain and mentor, now Commodore Sir Edward Pellew, visits his cell, seeking to understand what happened aboard the HMS Renown. From here, we flash back 6 months. Hornblower is now 3rd Lieutenant aboard the Renown, serving under the celebrated Captain James Sawyer, a veteran of the Battle of the Nile and one of Admiral Nelson's trusted band of brothers. The ship's senior officers include 1st Lieutenant Buckland, played by Nicholas Jones, a man who lacks confidence and decisiveness, and who Sharp fans will remember as Colonel Fletcher from Sharp's company. We also have the newly arrived 2nd Lieutenant William Bush, played by Paul McGann, who, as we also well know, was meant to play Sharp until his untimely injury, which meant that he was replaced by Sean Bean. He is a cool-headed and capable officer. And lastly we have 4th Lieutenant Archie Kennedy, Hornblower's closest friend. But something is terribly wrong. Captain Sawyer, once a naval hero, is descending into paranoia and instability. His behaviour towards his officers is becoming erratic. He accuses them of plotting against him, punishes perceived disloyalty with brutal floggings, and rules through fear rather than authority. We are also introduced to Gunner Hobbs, played by Philip Glenister. And yes, you've guessed it, he was also in Sharp as Matt Truman. Seems to be a rather lot of the old Sharp cast here in Hornblower, which I am all for. He is a Captain Sawyer loyalist, who spies on his fellow crewmates and reports to the captain, fueling his paranoia. A small subplot in this is a battle between Sykes and Randall. These two hate each other, constantly bickering and fighting. Randall is supported by Hobbs, who says the captain encourages men fighting as it fosters growth. Midshipman Wellard becomes the particular target of Sawyer's wrath, suffering a vicious flogging, and Hornblower himself is sentenced to a punishing 36-hour watch just for daring to defend the boy. Despite the tense atmosphere, Renown is dispatched on a mission to Santo Domingo, where Spanish privateers threaten British interests amidst the chaos of a slave rebellion. At sea, disaster nearly strikes when 2 French frigates appear, and because Sawyer had given the crew an extra ration of rum, it leaves them slow to respond. It was only because of Hornblower's quick thinking, by firing an empty stern chase to bluff them, that the ship is saved. But instead of praise, Hornblower receives Sawyer's fury for acting without orders. Matters come to a head when Sawyer finds Hornblower asleep on watch. a capital offence under the Articles of War, and Sawyer goads him to commit murder by offering him a pistol. Sawyer tells Hornblower, "I do believe your life is in my hands." Dr. Clive, the ship's doctor, and also a Sawyer loyalist, intervenes and leads the captain away. Sawyer's mental decline is now undeniable, and the lieutenants gather secretly to discuss whether they can declare him unfit for command. But as they deliberate, Sawyer was warned by the loyal gunner Hobbs, and begins to hunt them down. In the confusion, Sawyer falls into the ship's hold. By accident? Or was he pushed? No one really knows for sure. Sawyer suffers memory loss, and Dr. Clive keeps him sedated to avoid revealing his increasingly erratic behaviour. Rumours begin to circulate that someone may have just pushed Sawyer. He does, however, recover from this fall and resumes command, and Bush, Hornblower and Kennedy are arrested for mutiny. The Renown arrives at Santo Domingo only to find that the Spanish fort sits too high for the ship's guns to reach. She suffers heavy damage and casualties from the French cannons, but Sawyer insists on remaining and returning fire, even though it is practically ineffective. The Renown is grounded. The hold begins to flood, but luckily Matthews releases the imprisoned lieutenants to save them from drowning. Dr. Clive finally deems Sawyer unfit, although, as he says, it is under duress. So, Lieutenant Buckland takes charge and has the captain locked in his cabin. Hornblower and Bush execute a kedging manoeuvre that succeeds in freeing the Renown from the rocks, during which Hornblower saves Bush's life from drowning after having his arm caught in the anchor. This allows the ship to sail out of cannon range. This moves us back to present day in Kingston, and Commodore Pellew asks Hornblower to explain a bit more. This then ends episode 5, Mutiny, but moves swiftly on to episode 6, Retribution. Retribution picks up immediately, with Hornblower, Kennedy, Buckland and Bush facing a court-martial in Kingston, although it is only Buckland and Hornblower in the hearing, as for some reason that we are yet to find out, Kennedy and Bush are in hospital beds. The tribunal, led by Commodore Pellew, Captain Hammond and Captain Collins, must decide whether these officers are guilty of mutiny or whether they saved the ship from a madman. Pellew, as we know, is very fond of Hornblower, his former subordinate, while Hammond views the lieutenant as an overambitious schemer. We then go back to more flashbacks where we see Buckland panicking after Sawyer's fall. He wants to abandon the mission for the fort. However, it is Hornblower who suggests a bold alternative: a surprise night assault on the fort to neutralise the Spanish threat. But Buckland is not convinced. 33 seamen, led by Randall, desert during the night. Hobbs, however, cannot leave the captain, so promptly gets whacked in the face for good measure. Because the desertion occurred under his command, Buckland tries to salvage his reputation by agreeing to Hornblower's plan. The landing force, led by Hornblower, Kennedy and Bush, discovers the deserters all dead, to the horror of Hobbs, who was, let's just say, rather lucky he wasn't with them. Hornblower, however, concludes that they were not killed by Spanish, and it turns out that they were killed by rebelling slaves. A slave leader, Colonel Francois Lefanu, parleys with Buckland, admitting his men mistook the deserters for Spaniards. He demands the British leave Santo Domingo, asserting that this is not their fight. However, due to Buckland's blundering, a firefight begins, accidentally. The shots alert the Spanish to the British attack. The landing party charges the fort but is pinned down by heavy fire very quickly. Hornblower, however, has a cunning plan. He discovers a series of tunnels and leads well-armed Hobbs and Kennedy inside. This quick thinking saves the lives of Bush and his men, as well as resulting in the capture of the fort. After their victory, the British meet Colonel Francisco Manuel Ortega, the Spanish commander, who is strangely anxious to surrender the island to them, as long as the Spanish are allowed to board their ships and depart. They however soon discover why. The fort has been under siege by the rebel slaves for some time, and the Spanish are starving. At Hornblower's urging, Buckland stalls for time while a cannon is lifted up on a cliff where it can fire on the Spanish ships. Once they demonstrate that the Spanish ships are within range of the British cannon and give off a few shots, Buckland obtains an unconditional surrender. During this ordeal, however, we see Sawyer descend deeper into madness, loudly singing and speaking absolute nonsense. It is rather upsetting seeing a man who is held in such high esteem fall so low. Hobbs, who is still rather upset at the disposition of his captain, confronts Midshipman Willard and accuses him of pushing Sawyer down the hold. Or, if it wasn't him, tell him who did it. Willard holds firm and denies knowing who at all it was. As the Spanish are surrendering, the slaves attack the fort, and while evacuating the Spanish prisoners, Buckland orders the destruction of the fort. I do suspect that he was hoping Hornblower would accept the mission, as before this, Buckland had Sawyer in his ears, trying to corrupt and make Buckland paranoid, just like him. Hornblower offers to do the deed, and Buckland disobeys anyone else from helping him. But, as we know, Bush and Kennedy defy that order and aid their friend. As the three successfully detonate for the destruction of the fort, and as explosions are going off all around them, the three jump from the cliff, and the cheering renowned crew recovers them. Buckland is quite clearly disappointed at Hornblower's survival, but gives him command of the captured Spanish ships, and holds him responsible for their safe return. Later that night, the Spanish prisoners try to seize the Renown, due to, in part, a weak-willed marine. Buckland is bound and gagged, and is unable to help assist in defending the ship. The attempted seizure of the ship fails, due in large part to Hornblower leading his crew back aboard the Renown during the fighting. During the battle, Willard, after the abuse Sawyer gave him, uses this as an excuse to try and kill Sawyer. This is in part also him not wishing Sawyer to remember who pushed him down the hold. However, as the enemies enter, Willard kills one of them, but he and Sawyer are ultimately killed. Sawyer regains some semblance of clarity, and lets Willard know that he is a brave lad, before both getting shot. Hobbs, before a dying Willard, once more asks him to reveal the name of Sawyer's pusher. We don't see what is said, and Hobbs' reaction could really mean anything. During the battle, many men are killed, along with Bush and Kennedy getting badly injured. Kennedy, however, getting the worst of it. Now, back to the present. The tribunal members are rather unimpressed with Buckland when they learn that during the Spanish attempt to seize the Renown, he was surprised in bed and spent the fight tied up in his cabin. The tribunal and attendees end up mocking him and say that this is all that he will be remembered for. In an effort to save his career, Buckland rashly states that Sawyer became mentally unstable because Hornblower pushed him into the hold. Buckland calls on Hobbs to back him up on this. Now, it is implied that Hobbs know who did it. Certainly we have no clear answer on that, but it is suspected that Hornblower was that person. The many vignettes we see of Sawyer trying to remember who did it show Hornblower's outline, but whether that's from him pushing Sawyer or just a shadow remains to be seen. In a moment of disbelief, Hobbs states that he does not know how Sawyer was injured, essentially clearing Hornblower, but putting Buckland in an untenable situation. During a recess, Pellew tells Hammond and Collins that instead of hanging Hornblower, they should promote him instead, because of his bravery. In a final act of self-sacrifice, Archie Kennedy, already dying from his wounds, claims sole responsibility for Sawyer's fall, sparing Hornblower from the noose. He dies later on, but not before telling Hornblower that for all the good he has done, surely something good has to come Hornblower's way. We end with Pellew recognising Hornblower's brilliance and bravery, telling Hornblower that one of the Spanish ships has been renamed HMS Retribution, and that he is now the Retribution's new captain. By Mutiny and Retribution, Hornblower has grown far beyond the timid midshipman we first met in the Even Chance. He has evolved into a thoughtful and courageous officer, but crucially, his courage is not bluster or arrogance. It's quiet, reasoned, and laced with self-doubt. In these episodes, we see Hornblower grappling not just with external challenges, but with the immense internal pressure of the leadership and structures around him. We also see that he's learning hard lessons about when to obey and when to defy, and when to manipulate events to achieve the greater good. His battle with Sawyer pushes him to his limits. Hornblower respects Sawyer as a legend of a captain, even citing his excitement of being posted with him, but Hornblower sees the price Sawyer has paid for being that legend. When Captain Sawyer orders the flogging of Midshipman Wellard, only Hornblower actively tries to defend him, speaking up for mercy even though it costs him a brutal 36-hour watch. This moment reveals his fundamental courage, bravery to stand against injustice against the crew, only just doing their job. He respects the chain of command, but not to the point of blind obedience. When the lieutenants gather to discuss Sawyer's fitness, Hornblower doesn't immediately rush to mutiny. He pushes for discussion, for consensus, for the right path forward. He understands the gravity of declaring a captain unfit, and he treats it with the weight it deserves. Hornblower is also famously reserved. He's a man who bottles his feelings under layers of duty, very rarely showing emotion, but in these episodes those cracks start to show. After Archie's final confession at the tribunal, Hornblower's face says everything. He says little, but the loss is evident in his eyes. It is played beautifully. You feel Hornblower's grief without a single tear shed. He never schemes for advancement, but advancement always finds him, because others, especially Pellew, recognise not only his talents, but his integrity. By the end of Retribution, when Pellew promotes him to commander, that's a bittersweet note for him. Hornblower has risen, yes, but at the cost of Archie, and with a heavy burden of responsibility. Archie's arc across the series comes to a heartbreaking culmination here. He has slowly rebuilt himself through his friendship, courage and service. Archie is no longer just Hornblower's loyal friend. He is his equal in bravery and moral strength. What makes Archie's development so affecting is the quiet way it unfolds. He stands by Hornblower during the darkest moments, through Sawyer's madness and the back-breaking watches. He gives advice and support to Wellard, especially after the flogging he took. When Buckland falters, Archie does not seek to advance himself, but to support Hornblower and Bush, and in the end, facing certain death, he chooses to save Hornblower by taking the blame for Sawyer's fall. Archie's sacrifice is not born of despair, but of love for his friend, and Jamie Bamber gives a deeply moving performance, making Archie's final act one of quiet, unshowy heroism. William Bush arrives as a second lieutenant, and his initial impression is one of cool reserve and professional detachment. He is wary of Hornblower at first, understandably, as Hornblower's reputation precedes him. Paul McGann plays Bush with wonderful restraint, and across these two episodes, we watch Bush reassess his fellow officer, recognising his tactical brilliance, his calm under pressure, and most importantly his moral integrity. Bush himself is not a showy character. He is practical, disciplined, and a steadying presence. But he proves his loyalty not with grand speeches, but through action. Joining the secret meetings to discuss Sawyer, standing with Hornblower during the force assault, and critically, disobeying Buckland to help Hornblower set the charges at the fort. With Captain Sawyer, who is portrayed masterfully by David Warner, he is arguably the central tragic figure in Mutiny and Retribution. While Hornblower is the moral and narrative heart, it's Sawyer's slow unravelling that sets everything in motion. And what's so compelling about Sawyer is that he's simply not a tyrant or a madman. He's a deeply complex character whose authority is rotted from within, and whose decline exposes the fragility of naval command. We're told from the outset that Sawyer is a hero of the Battle of the Nile, one of Nelson's band of brothers. This isn't an ordinary captain, this is a man with a formidable reputation, legendary courage, and years of experience. When Sawyer first appears aboard the HMS Renown, the officers show him deep respect, but also a flicker of nervousness. There's a sense that even before his mental cracks become obvious, people are walking on eggshells around him. And what makes Sawyer's breakdown so tragic is how gradually and ambiguously it unfolds. There's no clear moment when he says, here is when he becomes unfit. At first, he seems merely strict, then erratic, and then ultimately cruel. He accuses his officers of conspiring against him without evidence, punishes Wellard savagely for minor errors, and puts Hornblower on an exhausting 36-hour watch for simply speaking up. Yet even in these moments, we do see flashes of clarity, and David Warner plays these contradictions perfectly, making Sawyer both frightening and pitiable. Perhaps the most debated aspect of Sawyer's downfall is whether he was pushed or fell into the hold. The series deliberately keeps this ambiguous. The officers themselves are divided. Hobbs is convinced someone betrayed Sawyer, and while Archie Kennedy in the end falsely confesses to pushing him to save Hornblower. But what's haunting is that Sawyer himself doesn't seem to know. His mental state is deteriorated to the point where he's lost grip on reality, and by the time he's confined to his cabin, he's a shadow of a man he once was. And David Warner's portrayal deserves absolute special praise here. He avoids the easy route of playing Sawyer as a cartoon villain. Instead, his performance is layered with sadness, anger, confusion, and flashes of his old greatness. When he bellows orders on deck, you believe he was once a feared and respected commander. When he slumps in his cabin, muttering himself, you feel the isolation and fear that come with authority slipping away. We also have Buckland, and who is in many ways the most human and pitiable figure aboard the Renown. He is a decent enough man, but utterly unsuited for leadership. Buckland's inability to make decisions, his craving for approval, and his naked fear of failure turn him into a man paralysed by self-interest. Throughout Mutiny and Retribution, Buckland is torn between doing what is right and protecting his own career. He repeatedly tries to assert authority, but is outmanoeuvred by Hornblower's initiative and Bush's quiet competence. When everything crumbles around him, Buckland's final act is to try and shift blame onto Hornblower, a last, desperate bid to salvage his reputation. His cowardice feels real, rooted in fear rather than malice. Despite his suffering, Midshipman Wellard proves himself resilient, observant and quietly courageous. His scenes with the Hornblower offer some of the few moments of genuine kindness in these grim episodes. He is strong in his beatings, which show a man who is inner strength. His death is brave, and the fact that he got a praise from a man who abused him in the end makes it all mean something. We also have Hobbs, as Sawyer's old loyalist. He is a hard, grizzled man whose devotion to his captain blinds him to reality. In his world, it is one of absolute loyalty and tradition. He must obey his captain no matter the cost. But even Hobbs, in the end, cannot really deny the truth. His journey is subtle, but important. Hobbs' final refusal to back Buckland's accusation is a small but vital act of moral clarity. One of the most impressive aspects of these two episodes is how confidently they handle tone, pacing, and atmosphere, delivering not just a historical adventure, but a tense, character-driven naval drama that often feels like a psychological thriller. The direction and writing in these episodes stand out even in an already strong series. The atmosphere is tense, almost claustrophobic, with the ship itself feeling like a powder keg ready to blow. The moral ambiguity, did someone push Sawyer or not, runs like a dark thread throughout the entire story. And much of the story takes place in confined spaces. The cramped gun decks, the dimly lit wardroom, the officers' cabins where whispered conspiracies unfold. These tight quarters create an almost suffocating tension, reflecting the rising paranoia. And at the same time, when the story opens up, during the sea battles, the storm or the assault on the Spanish fort, the direction switches gears smoothly. delivering sweeping, high-stakes action that never feels overblown. The practical effects, the use of real ships and location work help maintain a gritty realism. And the decision to split this story across 2 episodes works brilliantly because it allows for a dual structure, the slow-burning attention aboard the ship in Part 1, and the action-packed, emotionally explosive fallout in Part 2. And what's especially well done is the use of moral ambiguity and narrative momentum. We're not watching a simple tale of good mutineers versus a bad captain, instead we're drawn into questions. Did someone push Sawyer? Should the officers have acted sooner? Is Buckland merely incompetent, or something worse? Even in victory, there is no neat triumph. And I think that's what sets Mutiny and Retribution apart from many other period dramas. It avoids both romanticising naval warfare and reducing it to grim misery. Instead, they present an authentic, human-scale drama, where leadership is painful, bravery is complicated, and every victory comes at a price. This combination of tight, character-focused writing, atmospheric visuals, emotionally precise performances, and careful pacing results into episodes that don't just continue Hornblower's journey, they deepen and darken it. This is historical drama at its most intelligent and mature, delivering both spectacle and soul. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on these 2 episodes. Please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel grow, and follow me on X and join my Discord server. Links are in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.